Hello everyone, a very good morning and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So before we begin, we have a very important announcement. Starting from today, we shall be launching our current affairs course, that is UCAN, Unacademy's Current Affairs Navigator. For further details about the current affairs course, you can click on the link that has been provided in the video description. Through this course, we will comprehensively cover all the important current affairs, and the biggest USP of the program is that the respective teachers will be teaching current affairs from their concerned subjects. We will be covering from multiple sources, including all the important newspapers, the PIB and all the important magazines as well. So for further details, please visit the link that has been provided in the video description. So let's begin with the discussion of today's The Hindu newspaper. Let's look at the articles that we are going to discuss today, and then we'll get started with the discussion. From the Delhi edition of The Hindu, I have chosen 7 important articles. We have 6 articles that require a detailed analysis from a mains point of view, and we have only one prelims related article that is dealing with the NIA, the National Investigation Agency. So these are the 7 topics that we are going to cover in today's analysis, and I promise that it will be a comprehensive, fruitful discussion. If you guys feel the same, if you are liking these initiatives, do press the like button, do share your comments on what you think about our initiatives, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So let's begin with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at this important article from page number 1. This article is related to a topic from Indian polity, and it's related to a landmark judgment that was delivered by the Supreme Court yesterday. So let's look at the context. The Supreme Court of India passed a landmark ruling yesterday with regard to parliamentary privileges. I hope you know that parliamentary privileges, they are a constitutional provision contained under Article 105 and 194. It provides a certain degree of immunity for our legislators, for our MPs and MLAs, with regard to what they speak on the floor of the House, with regard to how they vote on the floor of the House. It protects them from criminal prosecution and provides other privileges as well to the members of the Lok Sabha and the members of the Legislative Assembly. So with regard to these constitutional provisions, there was a need for a clarification from the Supreme Court with regard to whether these legislators can face criminal charges if they have accepted a bribe in order to speak on the floor of the House or vote on the floor of the House. As you know, accepting a bribe in itself is a criminal offense. Let's say for a government employee, right? If a government employee were to take a bribe, both the bribe giver and the bribe taker, they would be liable for criminal prosecution. But however, what is interesting is that our legislators were not liable for criminal charges, for criminal prosecution, because they had been granted immunity from criminal prosecution if they accepted a bribe to vote on the floor of the House or to speak on the floor of the House. This immunity had been provided by the Supreme Court itself through its wrong interpretation of Article 105 and Article 194. So now the Supreme Court has overruled its own previous judgment, and a 7-judge constitution bench headed by Chief Justice of India, D.Y. Chandrachud, has delivered this landmark verdict that has overturned the JMM bribery case judgment that was delivered almost 25 years ago in 1998. The Supreme Court has held that parliamentary privilege or immunity which is granted to legislators under Article 105 and 194, it will not be available or it will not be applicable to the legislators if they are accused of accepting a bribe in order to speak in favor of the bribe giver. If it is alleged that a legislator has accepted a bribe to vote in a certain manner, to vote in a way that favors the bribe giver. So if this is established, then the legislators will have no immunity. They cannot enjoy parliamentary privilege and they will be liable for criminal prosecution. So this is the historic verdict delivered by the 7-judge bench of the Supreme Court, and it has overturned its own previous judgment in the JMM bribery case. Back in 1998, through the JM bribery case judgment, the Supreme Court had extended this immunity. The Supreme Court back then, a 5-judge bench, had ruled that legislators are not liable for criminal prosecution, even if they have taken a bribe to speak on the floor of the House or vote on the floor of the House. So this erroneous judgment has now been overruled and overturned by a much larger bench of the Supreme Court. In fact, this decision is so significant that the Prime Minister himself tweeted immediately after the judgment was delivered. The Prime Minister welcomed this historic judgment of the Supreme Court that helps in tackling the criminalization of Indian politics. It helps in tackling the corrupt nexus that has developed in our political system. Even opposition leaders from major parties like the Indian National Congress, the Communist Party of India, and other major parties, they've all welcomed this decision, and they've said that this ruling of the Supreme Court helps in protecting the integrity of the Parliament and the state legislatures. So that is why this ruling of the Supreme Court is so important and so significant. So let us dive deep into this topic. Let us understand what exactly does Article 105 and 194 deal with. What was the background to the JMM bribery case? And what has the 7-judge bench of the Supreme Court observed while passing this historic judgment? All these discussions that we are going to have in the next few minutes can be very, very important for a possible mains question on this topic. You can even expect a related prelims question on Article 105 and Article 194. So let's begin with the basics. Let's understand these constitutional provisions that provide parliamentary privilege to our legislators. If you look at Part 5 of the Indian Constitution that deals with Parliament, the Indian Parliament, we have Article 105, which is one of the most important and most powerful articles in the Constitution. It deals with the powers, privileges of the Houses of Parliament and of the members and as well as the parliamentary committees. This article essentially defines some of the powers of the Houses of the Parliament, the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. It provides certain privileges and immunities to the legislators, to the MPs of Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. It also extends these privileges to the parliamentary committees as well. So what kind of privileges and immunities are granted? Let's take a look. It essentially protects the freedom of speech of the legislators in the Parliament. See, the very bedrock of a democratic institution or a democratic setup is to protect the freedom of speech of every individual. Just like citizens are guaranteed the right to free speech and expression under Article 19, even legislators on the floor of the House should be able to enjoy the right to free speech. They should be able to say what they want to say on the floor of the House. They should be able to cast a vote according to their rights and their wishes. Of course, they have to toe the party line as well. They have to abide by the directions issued by the party whip. But at the same time, they should not be subjected to any undue influence when they are speaking on the floor of the House or when they are voting on the floor of the House. So through Article 105, freedom of speech of the legislators is guaranteed on the floor of the House. It is not open for any judicial scrutiny. The legislators cannot be held liable, right? They can't be charged. They can't be tried in courts. Criminal cases can't be pressed against them for what they say on the floor of the House and for how they vote on the floor of the House. So this is the immunity provided so that they can freely speak as to what they want to on the floor of the House and vote in a manner as prescribed by the party whip. The party whip would have issued directions with regard to any votes that are cast in the Parliament, right? Even in the standing committees, in the parliamentary standing committees, there are a lot of debates, discussions held, and in all these cases, the MPs should have the full freedom to speak and express their views and opinions without having the fear of being subjected to judicial scrutiny, without having the fear of inviting criminal charges and prosecution. So to protect the rights of the parliamentarians, this privilege, this immunity has been provided. No member of the parliament shall be liable for any proceedings in any court for anything said or any vote given by them on the floor of the House. That is exactly what Article 105 provides for. Is that clear? For what they say on the floor of the House, as part of the committee members, as part of the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, and with regard to how they vote, right? They can't be held liable in any court. They can't be dragged into any kind of civil or criminal proceedings against them. Similar privileges are provided to state legislators as well through Article 194. Article 194 extends a similar set of privileges and immunities to your MLAs, and the MLCs, the legislators essentially at the state level. Understood? Now the question is, does this immunity, does this privilege extend to criminal acts as well? The one possible criminal act which can be committed by the legislators on the floor of the House is accepting bribe, taking bribe from vested interests in order to speak in a certain manner, in order to raise a certain issue which would favor the bribe giver. Or they might have taken bribes while casting their vote. While, let's say, there is a bill which is being debated and which has to be passed, right? Or let's say during Rajya Sabha elections, for example, recently, just few days back, Rajya Sabha elections were held. There were allegations of cross voting, right? Cross voting is still allowed with regard to Rajya Sabha elections, where one party member votes for the nominee, Rajya Sabha nominee of another party. That is still valid legally and constitutionally. But what if that member has taken a bribe from the other party to vote in favor of a certain nominee? So that is what brings up the concern. What if legislators are taking bribes from other political parties, or maybe the party in power, or maybe from private companies to raise questions, to vote in a certain manner, to speak in a certain manner? Then that is clearly a criminal offense. They should be liable for criminal prosecution, right? If this applies for civil servants, for government employees, then why shouldn't it apply for legislators as well? Right? They're not above rule of law. They're not above the law of the land. The law is supreme. But unfortunately, until now, legislators were not liable for criminal prosecution. Legislators had full privilege and immunity, and this was an interpretation given by the Supreme Court itself. In 1998, in the JMM bribery case, the Supreme Court had passed an erroneous judgment through which it had extended this immunity under Article 105 and 194 to cover cases of bribery as well. So what exactly is the JMM bribery case? The basic background is important. To understand what the Supreme Court had ruled in 1998, we have to take a look at the JMM bribery case. JMM refers to the political party, Jharkhand Mukti Morcha. This case goes all the way back to the 1991 elections. In 1991, the Congress party had emerged as the single largest party. Eventually, P.V. Narasimha Rao, the Congress leader, would become the Prime Minister of India. This government was supported by few coalition partners as well. But there was a no confidence motion that was moved against the Narasimha Rao government. In the mid-90s, a no confidence motion was moved against the P.V. Narasimha Rao government. So when this voting was taking place, either in favor or against the no confidence motion, a member of JMM, Ajit Singh, a very popular politician, was accused of taking a bribe while casting his vote during this no confidence motion. This allegation was taken up by the CBI. The CBI started looking into this case, and eventually the case reached the Supreme Court, the doors of the Supreme Court. So the allegation was that some party members of JMM, who were MPs in the parliament, especially Ajit Singh, they were accused of taking a bribe from a certain party to vote in a certain way during this no confidence motion, which was intended to bring down the Narasimha Rao government. So this case that was taken up by the CBI, it involved a criminal case. Criminal charges were being pressed. So the accused, they reached the doors of the Supreme Court asking for relief and claiming immunity under Article 105 and 194, saying that whatever they say on the parliament, on the floor of the house, and however they vote on the floor of the parliament, it's protected from court proceedings as given by Article 105 and 194. The Constitution doesn't say that it provides immunity for criminal charges and criminal prosecution, but the Supreme Court gave this interpretation in the JMM bribery case. In 1998, the Supreme Court ruled, a 5-judge bench of the Supreme Court ruled that privileges and immunity granted under Article 105 and 194 extends to criminal charges as well. That includes the charge of bribery. That includes the charge of taking a bribe to speak in a certain way and to vote in a certain way on the floor of the House. Now, this judgment hit at the very foundation of the Indian Parliament. Imagine where legislators are taking bribes to raise certain questions to favor a vested interest, a political party or a private corporate company. What if they are voting in a certain way to favor these vested interests? Right? This has direct consequences for representative democracy in the country. It hits at the very foundation of rule of law. As I told you, legislators are not above the law. They're not above the law of the land. Right? So this was a violation of rule of law. It hit at the very foundation of a constitutional democracy. Finally, this erroneous judgment of the Supreme Court has been overruled by a larger bench. A 7-judge bench headed by the Chief Justice of India has overruled this judgment of 1998, and it has held that privileges and immunities will not extend to charges of bribery. If there is a bribe which has been provided to an MP or a MLA so that they can speak in a certain manner, they can raise certain issues, or they can vote in a certain manner in order to favor the bribe giver, in such cases, privileges and immunity will not be available to the legislators. They will be liable for criminal prosecution in criminal courts. So this is indeed a historic judgment. It overrules the JMM bribery case judgment, and the Chief Justice has also said that previously the Supreme Court had erred in the JMM judgment. The Supreme Court has recognized that the 1998 ruling was an erroneous ruling. The Chief Justice of India, who was heading the 7-judge bench, has pointed out how representative democracy was at stake because of this erroneous judgment. If legislators have this immunity with regard to bribery charges, then it undermines the very parliamentary system. It undermines the representative democratic system that we have set up. The voters, they cast their vote, elect their MPs and MLAs by placing a certain amount of faith in them. They place faith in the institutions, in the parliament, in the legislature. But if these legislators elected by the voters, if they are taking bribes to speak, to raise questions, to vote, then it hits at the very foundation of electoral democracy and representative democracy. So that is exactly what the Supreme Court has recognized while overruling the erroneous judgment that was delivered under the JMM bribery case. Now let us see what the Supreme Court has observed on bribe taking by legislators. There are some important observations that have been made, and it has also established a twofold test to decide whether legislators should have immunity and privileges or not. So let's take a look at this. Chief Justice Chandrachud has observed that the act of bribery is completed once the money is accepted, or even if the two parties reach an agreement to engage in the corrupt practice. It doesn't matter whether the legislator has spoken on the floor of the House in favor of the bribe giver. It doesn't matter whether the legislator has cast a vote to favor the bribe giver, right? Irrespective of that, if the bribe giver and bribe taker have reached an agreement to form this nexus, where the legislator has agreed to take money to compromise his integrity as a legislator, that itself constitutes an act of bribery according to the Supreme Court. This is sufficient to waive off the privileges and immunity and press criminal charges against that legislator. Money may not have been exchanged. The legislator may not have even spoken on the floor of the House or voted to favor the bribe giver. But if the two parties have reached that agreement, if they have already made that corrupt arrangement between themselves, that is enough to press criminal charges against the legislator and immunity will not be applicable. And even if money has changed hands, if bribe giver has already transferred the money to the legislator, even if that legislator has not spoken on the floor of the House or voted to favor that bribe giver, even that constitutes an act of bribery. It's a corrupt act, a criminal act. Because the intention is what matters. It is the intent of that legislator and the bribe giver. The bribe giver definitely is liable for criminal prosecution. Bribe givers have no kind of immunity. It was only the legislators who could be the bribe takers who had a degree of privilege and immunity because of these two constitutional provisions. So now the Supreme Court has said that if the intent for a corrupt practice is established, this is enough to waive off the privilege and the immunity, and those legislators will be liable for criminal prosecution. So this is a very important observation. Now, during this hearing, there was an argument that whether the withdrawal of immunity to legislators from criminal prosecution, will it affect the right to free speech of the legislators to the floor of the House? This is a valid concern. What if the party which is in power is able to abuse the law and use this to target opposition MPs and opposition MLAs? The Supreme Court has said that this is a notion. It is a notion that right to free speech of opposition legislators can be curbed by the ruling party which is in power. The Supreme Court has dismissed this concern while passing this historic judgment, saying that in the name of protecting free speech, we can't tolerate any incident of corrupt bribe practices taking place in the institution of the parliament and the state legislature. The Supreme Court has dismissed this as a notion that whether these charges are pressed or not, right, it doesn't affect the right to free speech of the opposition politicians, the opposition legislators. Then coming to the importance of privileges in a parliamentary democracy, the Supreme Court has observed that the bribed lawmakers, right, the lawmakers who are taking bribes, these legislators, they destroy the very spirit of a democracy. Parliamentary immunity has been provided to ensure that legislators contribute positively to strengthen the democracy. If a legislator is voting on the floor of the House or speaking on the floor of the House to constructively contribute to the Indian democracy, to deliberate, to discuss, debate, to bring out key issues, to highlight pressing challenges, to represent his or her constituency, in that case, right to free speech has to be protected. In only genuine circumstances, the legislators should have their privilege and immunity, not for corrupt practices like taking a bribe. Because the very practice of corrupt legislators taking bribes for what they speak and how they vote itself erodes representative democracy. That is something that the Supreme Court has made it very, very clear. So what is this twofold test that the Supreme Court has laid down? Now, in the future, if these cases come up, let's say there is a case where a legislator has been accused of taking bribe and the authorities are moving to press a criminal case, a criminal charge against that legislator. Or let's say in another unrelated case, right, where there's no bribery angle, the legislator is claiming immunity from any kind of prosecution, from any kind of proceedings in a court by using the privileges and immunities of Article 105 and 194. So in those cases, how will the authorities, how will the court decide? How will the court decide whether immunity should be provided or not? Whether the immunity should be waived off? Right? This is decided on the basis of a twofold test that the Supreme Court has laid down. The Supreme Court has said, if a legislator meets the two criteria laid down over here, then immunity will be extended. The constitutional immunity given through Article 105, 194 will be applicable to those legislators so that it protects their right to free speech. But if they fail the twofold test, if they fail even one of the conditions, right, then it means that the legislator has done something criminal or corrupt. In that case, the immunity will not be provided, the privileges will be waived off, allowing for criminal charges to be pressed against that corrupt legislator. So let's look at these two conditions. One, actions of a legislator, if it is to enhance the dignity of the House, if it is to contribute to the democratic system, to the parliamentary system, right? If that genuine intention is established, then it means that the legislator deserves privilege and immunity to protect their right to free speech. Then second, if they are exercising their right in line with the constitutional principles, if they are using their right to free speech to protest against the government, to criticize the government, to discuss a critical issue, or to raise key questions, to hold the executive accountable on the floor of the House, if this genuine intention is established, then legislators deserve privilege and immunity, because their right to free speech on the floor of the House is critical as well to hold the executive accountable. But if they fail the test, if their actions are not intended to uphold the dignity of the House, if they are not constructively contributing to the parliamentary system, and if they are not genuinely holding the government accountable, and if they have taken money from someone to ask these questions or to vote in a certain way, in such cases, immunity will not be provided. So this is the historic ruling of the Supreme Court. Now, coming to the last point, some of you might have a doubt. You might ask, sir, won't this violate the doctrine of separation of powers? Now, the Supreme Court, which is the judiciary, has essentially stepped into the domain of the legislature. The ruling of the court has an impact on how the legislatures will function. But if you look at the Indian Constitution, there is one core principle, one of the basic structures of the Indian Constitution, which is the doctrine of separation of powers. There is a clear jurisdiction drawn between the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. And ideally, one should not step into the domain of the other. Right? The legislature has a responsibility to hold the executive accountable, the government accountable. The judiciary has to ensure it doesn't overstep its jurisdiction. It shouldn't step into the domain of the government or the legislature. Right? Legislature and the executive should not curb the independence of the judiciary. So these are well accepted principles of the Indian Constitution, which is seen as part of the basic structure. Now, the Supreme Court lifting the immunity on legislators in case of corrupt bribery charges, right? Would this constitute a violation of the Supreme Court's interference with the functioning of the legislature? That is the question. The Supreme Court has answered this question as well. See, the legislature also has its own powers to hold the corrupt legislators accountable. The chairperson, the speaker of the Lok Sabha, the chairman of the Rajya Sabha, right? They are empowered to hold corrupt legislators accountable as well. Within the legislature, there are rules, business rules of the House, which allows the chairperson to hold such corrupt legislators accountable. So the question is, will these powers of the legislature, will it overlap with what the judiciary has ruled? Now, let's say there is a case which comes up tomorrow where a legislator is accused of taking a bribe. Now, the question is, who will handle that particular case? Will the legislature resolve this within the House itself, or will it reach the court? Will it be handled by the judiciary? That is the question. So to this question, the Supreme Court has said there is no conflict at all. These are two parallel, distinct powers that exist for both the legislature and the judiciary. Let's say there is a charge of corruption that comes up against a legislator. The House can continue its investigation. Let's say it happens in the Lok Sabha. The Lok Sabha can continue its investigation, its proceedings against that legislator, take action as it seems fit. At the same time, the judiciary can also continue with the criminal proceedings that may have been pressed against the corrupt legislator. The Supreme Court has said that jurisdiction of the criminal courts and the jurisdiction of the houses of the legislature, they are parallel jurisdictions. They don't overlap. They function in a distinct sphere. They exist in distinct spheres. So it means, let's say there is a Lok Sabha MP who has taken, let's say there is a charge, there is an allegation against a Lok Sabha MP that he or she has taken a bribe. The Lok Sabha can continue with its proceedings, right? So without compromising its own jurisdiction and authority, Lok Sabha can continue its investigations and proceedings against the allegation. At the same time, if criminal charges are brought up, right, the proceedings can be handled by a criminal court as well. And according to the Supreme Court, these two jurisdictions of the judiciary and the legislature does not overlap. These are parallel jurisdictions that exist in two distinct spheres. So these are the important points that we take away from this historic judgment of the Supreme Court. You can definitely expect a prelims or even a mains question. So do prepare for this topic. I've given a practice question as well at the end, which you can use for your answer writing practice. Now let's take up a very, very important column from page number 8. This article deals with India's nuclear program. The article is referring to the 3-stage nuclear program of India, and this topic has been in the news because Prime Minister Narendra Modi yesterday flagged off a critical operation that marks the beginning of India's second stage of its 3-stage nuclear program. So let's look at the context and then understand what is India's 3-stage nuclear program and what is this event that happened yesterday, which is so significant with regard to India's nuclear research and nuclear program. Yesterday, PM Modi is on a tour to Tamil Nadu and he visited the nuclear plant at Kalpakkam. He visited the Kalpakkam nuclear facility and he witnessed a very significant event, a milestone event in India's nuclear program. He witnessed the core loading, where the core of the nuclear reactor was loaded to start the operation of the prototype fast breeder reactor. A fast breeder reactor is a unique type of nuclear reactor which plays a critical role in India's 3-stage nuclear program. So the core loading, where the core of the nuclear reactor has been loaded yesterday in front of the Prime Minister, it marks a milestone event, a very significant historic event, because this is the beginning, the start of the second stage of India's 3-stage nuclear program. So that is why understanding India's 3-stage nuclear program is important, and having a basic idea about the second stage of the nuclear program is also significant. So this milestone has been achieved by Bhavini Bharatiya Nabikya Vidyut Nigam Limited, and it has operationalized the fast breeder reactor, the prototype fast breeder reactor at Kalpakkam. So let's understand why India has a 3-stage nuclear program. Who designed it? What is the whole plan of this 3-stage nuclear program? And why is it relevant for us? See, India is not blessed with uranium resources. You might have studied this in geography, in science and technology as well, that we do not have sufficient uranium reserves in India. The required fissile material to initiate a nuclear chain reaction, to trigger the nuclear fission reaction, right? It's not available in enough quantities in India. So India will have to depend on uranium imports from other countries. But this has always been a challenge as we have faced difficulties in procuring the nuclear raw material that is needed. Right? Uranium-233 is essentially what you require. That is the isotope that you need to generate energy, to generate your electricity in your civilian nuclear reactors. India has very, very modest deposits of uranium. There are very, very limited reserves of uranium in India. Right? In Jharkhand, there's a small uranium mine. In the northeast of India and also in the Deccan Plateau, there are very small limited reserves present, which is nowhere sufficient to fuel our nuclear civilian program. So this is where a genius plan was devised by the father of India's nuclear program, Homi Jahangir Baba. In the 1950s, Homi Baba, the father of India's nuclear research program, came out with this plan, the 3-stage plan, because India has enormous reserves of thorium. India is said to have one of the world's largest reserves of thorium in the world. Along the coastline of India, right, the monzite sand which is present, the monazite sand is a great resource for extracting thorium. India has enormous quantities of thorium, one of the world's largest reserves of thorium. But we can't directly use thorium because thorium is not fissile. It's not fit for a nuclear reaction. But through thorium, we can initiate a certain reaction, right, through which uranium-233 can be produced. But to do that, we need plutonium. To ensure that we use the thorium reserves we have to produce the required uranium, we also need plutonium. Now, who will provide this to India, right? Because initially in the 70s, 80s and 90s, our nuclear program has been targeted by the global community, particularly the Western countries. India never signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, right? We continued with our nuclear weapons program, and we even conducted a nuclear weapons test in 1974. So as a result, India was outside of the nuclear market. There were economic sanctions on India, technological sanctions on India when we conducted the Pokhran tests, which has always limited India's ability to source uranium and nuclear material from other countries. Today, of course, these sanctions are lifted. India's nuclear program is recognized. We have signed nuclear deals with many countries. Many countries are willing to supply uranium to India. But that is something India can't rely upon entirely, right? It won't make us self-sufficient. If you're depending on others for the fissile material, which is the critical raw material needed, right, then our nuclear program would no longer be self-sufficient. We will become self-sufficient if we can use the large thorium reserves that we have. But to make use of thorium reserves, right, we had to design a three-stage nuclear program. And what are these three stages? Let's take a look. In the first stage of a nuclear program, which has been ongoing till now, we have been using heavy water reactors fueled by natural uranium, which produces plutonium as the nuclear waste, right? But this is, however, not a waste nuclear material. This can be used as the feed material for the second stage of the nuclear cycle. So by using the limited natural uranium that we have and maybe some uranium imports that we are going to do, we can use that in these heavy water reactors. These heavy water reactors are the stage 1 reactors of India's nuclear program. So by using heavy water reactors, natural uranium can be used to trigger a chain reaction, a nuclear fission reaction that produces plutonium as the output. Now this plutonium that you see here will drive the second stage of our nuclear program. But here you need something called fast breeder reactors, where plutonium from the first stage is used with a mix of uranium. A mix of natural uranium and plutonium is used, and a certain reaction known as transmutation is carried out to generate even more uranium-233. What is transmutation? Transmutation is a process where the atom of one element is converted into the atom of another element through nuclear reactions. So the plutonium that we are using here can be converted to produce more uranium. Since we don't have enough uranium on our own, we can use the limited natural uranium to create plutonium in the first stage and use a mix of plutonium and natural uranium to carry out transmutation, a process called transmutation, where the atom of one element gets converted into the atom of another element through a nuclear reaction. So basically, the large quantities of plutonium produced by the first stage will act as a fuel for the transmutation reaction, and it will start converting into uranium-233, right? Then finally, we enter the third stage, where we use the sufficient uranium reserves that we have built through the first and second stage of our program with the thorium reserves, which is available abundantly along India's coastline, to power the third stage of our nuclear program. In the third stage, we can transmutate thorium into uranium-233. Thorium again itself is not a fissile material, but through the third stage reaction, we can convert the thorium into the fissile material that we need, which is uranium-233. So this is the three-stage plan of India's nuclear program. This will help us become self-sufficient without having to depend heavily on uranium imports, even with limited uranium supplies. By using our own reserves and some limited uranium imports, we can power the entire stage where we will reach a point where the large thorium reserves we have can be transmutated into the uranium that we need to power our nuclear reactors. This essentially would make India self-sufficient in the civilian nuclear domain. So this is where the significance of the fast breeder reactor comes in. The fast breeder reactor, which has been operationalized at Kalpakkam yesterday, right? It's a critical event. The reactor itself is very critical because this is what marks the second stage, the start of the second stage of our nuclear program. Until now, India was still in the first stage of its nuclear program. We were just relying on uranium, right, to produce the electricity that we needed. And large quantities of plutonium has been accumulated in India through the first stage reaction. But through a fast breeder reactor, where plutonium and uranium are mixed, through this reaction, we can transmutate plutonium into uranium to generate the uranium that we need, which can also be used for the third stage of the nuclear cycle, right? So yesterday, India has successfully carried out the core loading event, where the core of the nuclear reactor is loaded. That begins this fission reaction in the fast breeder reactor, and it triggers this transmutation process between plutonium and uranium. So this will generate enough uranium as well. It will actually produce more fuel than it consumes. Can you believe that? That is the beauty of a nuclear fission reaction and the three-stage program devised by Homi Bhabha. It produces sufficient energy that provides us with electricity, right? And it also generates more uranium. That is the advantage of a fast breeder reactor. It produces more fuel than it is consuming. So by using the output, the byproduct of the first stage, that is plutonium, along with some natural uranium, we are actually producing more uranium than it is consuming, right? So you're generating clean energy as well, plus you're generating more uranium, which is needed to make use of the thorium reserves that we have. The final goal, the end game of India, is to get to the third stage, where we have sufficient uranium to use thorium in the final transmutation process, where thorium is converted to uranium to make India self-sufficient in the nuclear domain. That is the importance of this event. Next, on page number 6, we have an important editorial that is related to social issues and gender issues. The editorial is talking about the surname which women are supposed to derive following their marriage. I'm sure all of you know that this has become a social custom, a social practice, not just in India but around the world, where post-marriage, the wife is expected to draw the family name, the surname of the husband. Right? So this is not just a practice limited or restricted to India. This is a global practice, a global cultural social norm. But let me tell you how this goes against the principle of gender equality. That is exactly what the editorial is trying to do. In fact, there are certain communities in India where after marriage, the entire name of the woman is changed by the husband. Let's say the woman's parents would have given her a particular name during her birth, right? But post-marriage, the husband gets the right to change the whole name, including the first name, not just the surname, including the first name. Now the question is, can't a woman decide what her name has to be? Whether she wants to inherit her father's surname or the husband's surname, or go without any surname attached. That should be the individual choice of the woman. But unfortunately, the legal system, right, encourages this social bias that exists. In patriarchal societies, in male-dominated societies, right, this is the norm, this is the practice. Not just in India, but around the world, where women are expected, right, as a customary practice to change their surname to that of the husband's family's name. So this, right, places an unfair burden on women, and this issue has been recently brought up in a particular case where a woman who's undergoing a divorce, right, she wants to change her name, her surname, but she is facing difficulties. The authorities are not allowing it to happen. So she has reached the doorsteps of the court to ask for relief, because this is a fundamental right, right? A right to have the identity that you want, the right to choose the name that you want. If a married woman wants to go back to her maiden name given by her parents, or if she wants to adopt a different name altogether, right, that right should be available, because there are no such restrictions on the husband. So this, in a way, accounts for gender disparity. Now the problem here is when women who don't take up their husband's surname, right, or they don't take up the husband's name into their surname, they face actual legal problems and practical problems. For example, if they try to open a bank account, especially joint accounts, let's say a man and woman are married, right? The woman is independent, she doesn't want to take the husband's name, she wants to retain her father's name or her maiden family surname. There's nothing wrong with that. If she does that, when opening joint accounts in a bank, she will face unnecessary questions. The banks will ask for unnecessary documents as to why the married woman has not changed her name. That is the level of unfairness that has been built into the system because of these social norms and these cultural practices, which is clearly biased against one gender. Now let's say this husband and wife who are married, they have a child, and they approach a school for admission. They try to get their kid admitted into a school. If the wife hasn't changed her surname and taken the husband's name, believe it or not, while admitting the kid, they face problems and challenges. The schools insist as to why the wife's name has not been changed, right? The same issues prop up when married women try to get their passports done. In several passport offices, authorities have insisted, right, as to why the wife's name has not been changed, why the surname has not been changed. So this is the level of unfairness and gender bias that has been built into our administrative system and legal system, which is an unfortunate result of the social practice that is prevalent. So this is clearly unfair to the female gender, and this is built on the system of patriarchy. It is a male-dominated social practice which has been imbibed into our legal administrative setup as well. So this woman who's going through a divorce, right, she wants to change her name and she has approached the court for relief. So that is why this issue was being explored in this editorial. The editorial says that in today's world, right, you can talk about progressiveness, you can talk about gender equality, but you can't achieve true gender equality without allowing the woman to retain her maiden name. There should be no compulsion of any sort on married women to take up their husband's name or to change their surname altogether after their marriage, right? So editorial is suggesting there should be a law, there should be a legal intervention by the legislature, right? Right now these practices are happening because there is no clear definite framework that exists. So editorial is urging the legislature to consider a law, right, which protects this right of women to retain the name that they want. Is that clear? So that is the point being highlighted by this editorial. Next, on the same page, we have an important column that deals with Russia-North Korea relations. Russia and North Korea have always been traditional allies, and in the last couple of years, their relations have become stronger and stronger. Now, some of you might think, how is this topic relevant for us? It's not even related to UPSC syllabus. But trust me, Russia-North Korea ties has global ramifications. The close ties that are further developing between Russia and North Korea, it has a global impact, and it has an impact on India as well, on Indian interests. So just understanding what's happening between Russia and North Korea is very important, and how it can influence global geopolitics is very important. See, as you know, Russia has always maintained close ties with North Korea given their communist links. Since the Cold War period, since the Korean War of 1950s, then Soviet Union was always a supporter of the north part of the Korean peninsula. Following the Second World War, by early 1950s, the Korean War broke out between the north and the south. The Cold War divide was clearly reflected in this war. North Korea was under the influence of a communist government backed by the Soviet Union, the then Soviet Union, and South Korea was backed by the Western democracies led by the US. So as a result of the Cold War divide, Korean peninsula itself got divided. This Korean conflict dragged for a number of years. And even India played a role actually. India was party to some of the negotiations between North and South Korea. We contributed peacekeeping forces as well to maintain peace along the armistice line. We even provided relief material, medical assistance to those who were injured during the Korean conflict. So right from the beginning, India has an involvement in the Korean conflict. Is that clear? We have very, very good relations with South Korea today. We even had a decent relationship with North Korea until recently, believe it or not. In fact, India had a very good trading relationship with North Korea until all the sanctions were imposed. So India has been a significant influence in the Korean peninsula post-independence. So following this Cold War divide, there has been constant rivalry and enmity between the North and the South, right? So Soviet Union has been a major supporter of North Korea. You know that North Korea has been ruled by authoritarian military dictatorship, right? The North Korean leaders, they have been leading a dynastic rule where the leader is supreme, right? And it has pursued a policy of hatred, enmity, and rivalry, not just with South Korea, but also with its allies, including Japan, right? And especially the United States. So this ongoing rivalry between North Korea on one side and Japan, South Korea, and US on the other side has become a major flashpoint in this region, in the East Asia region. Now today, a very unique equation has developed between Russia and North Korea. Post-Cold War, Soviet Union had disintegrated. So Russia continued the close relationship because don't forget, Russia and North Korea are neighbors. They are neighboring countries. They share land and sea maritime borders. Especially in the last 2 years, dependency between Russia and North Korea has increased and it's no longer a one-way relationship. For many decades, it was Russia which was helping North Korea. But today, North Korea is also helping Russia. They have come out with a quid pro quo arrangement where both these authoritarian countries and aggressive powers which are destabilizing the world, they are helping out each other wherever they have a deficiency. For example, North Korea, because of its dictatorial rule, because of its obsession with militarization, it has spent all the money it has, the limited resources it has on weapons development, militarization, nuclear weapons, ballistic missiles, etc. But the country is one of the most poorest countries in the world. It is completely isolated. Because of its nuclear weapons program, it has been sanctioned by the UN. Western countries have imposed crippling sanctions on North Korea through the UN and the global financial systems. FATF has blacklisted North Korea, meaning its economy is completely cut off from the rest of the world. So North Korea is as isolated a country can get, right? Even to enter the country, it's very difficult for any foreigner to even enter North Korea, even as a tourist. It's almost difficult or even almost impossible, right? So it's an isolated, cut off country, right? And a country with such limited trade, limited industries, limited economic development has spent whatever resources it has on unnecessary militarization. Why? Because the authoritarian leaders are obsessed with countering South Korea, countering Japan, countering US. Because these three allies have formed a military alliance against North Korea. So this rivalry between them has pushed the North Korean dictatorship to just focus on militarization, on nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles, but its population is extremely poor. There is barely any infrastructure created to enable the upliftment of the people of North Korea. There is massive hunger and food insecurity in North Korea. In fact, until recently, guess which country was providing food security to North Korea? It was India. India had a decent food supply which we were exporting to North Korea. But today, those food supplies have gone down as the sanctions have become more strict against North Korea. Even India doesn't want to be closely involved with a country which has been completely outcast by all the global institutions. So North Korea is a poor country, a hungry country without enough food, without basic infrastructure. But North Korea has one thing. It has weapons. Because of its obsession with militarization, it has sufficient weapons. Now, Russia is facing a critical shortage of weapons because of the Ukraine war. In the last couple of years, Russia has exhausted its military resources. Russia is facing a critical shortage of battle tanks, artillery guns, other ammunition, rockets, missiles, etc. So Russia and North Korea are closely developing this deal where North Korea has become a weapon supplier to Russia today. Recently, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un visited Russia, met with Putin. In just a few days, Russian leader Putin is expected to visit North Korea. This is a symbol, a sign of the growing relations between Russia and North Korea. These high-level interactions are happening because North Korea has become the weapon supplier to Russia to fuel its war in Ukraine. So over the last 12 to 15 months, Western intelligence agencies have noted enormous arms supply, weapon supply from North Korea to Russia, which is being used in Ukraine. And what does North Korea get in return? North Korea will get funds, money, help in infrastructure creation. More importantly, it will get food supplies. Don't forget, Russia is a major food supplier. Russia is a major producer of wheat and other essential food crops. Right? Russia has enormous supplies of food. So Russia is providing food supplies, helping in North Korea's infrastructure, in solving its electricity problem, transportation problem. It's providing investments, funds, which North Korea desperately needs. And in return, it's taking North Korean weapons to continue its war in Ukraine. That is the nexus which has developed between them. There are also reports that Russia and North Korea are considering the development of spy satellites together. Russia and North Korea are likely to collaborate to develop spy and military satellites to carry out surveillance, to snoop into enemy communication. And this developing nexus between them poses a great danger to the whole region. It could further destabilize the entire region. And Russia and North Korea are both close allies of another aggressive communist power, that is China. The three countries are very close allies of each other. They share very close political, diplomatic and military relations. China has been the one which has enabled North Korea's nuclear program, just like it enabled Pakistan's nuclear program. China has often used North Korea as a proxy to destabilize Japan and US in the region. Right? So China, Russia, North Korea, they form a nexus. They are even thinking of joint military exercises in the coming days. They are planning joint trilateral military exercises to pose a counter to the West, led by the US and its allies. So these increasing divisions, rivalries, hostilities, it presents a great danger to the whole world, right? So obviously Indian interests are in the line. We have very good ties with Russia, but as Russia gets closer to North Korea, there will be uncomfortable questions asked for India as to why India continues its ties with Russia. So it will create more challenges for India as these divisions increase between Russia and the West, between North Korea and the West, and China and the West. That is why the topic becomes relevant for our exams. Now let's look at another article on page number 7. This article deals with the extent of Indian illegal migration that is happening to other countries, to Western developed countries. Now, this is a topic that we have explored repeatedly over the last few days. We have had this discussion a couple of times before as well. So, this article here is providing a data picture, a data point to understand what extent of illegal migration is happening from India to other Western countries. The article says that the United Kingdom alone has received more than 1,000 Indians through the illegal route last year in 2023. Meaning, these are Indians who moved out of India illegally, they didn't have valid visas, right? They took the help of human traffickers and other middlemen to cross over from India to other countries, through multiple countries, right? They would have gone through a difficult route to reach Western Europe. They reach France after taking a circuitous route based on illegal documents and with the help of human trafficking agents and middlemen, right? They somehow reach Western Europe, particularly France, after passing through multiple countries. They either go to West Asian countries like UAE or Saudi Arabia, right? From there, they make a difficult journey towards Europe, or they go to Central Asia, right? From there, they pass through Eastern Europe, across Central Europe, and then reach Western Europe. But their final destination would be United Kingdom, right? So from France, they cross the English Channel. They join other illegal migrants from other countries. They join refugees from other countries who are waiting here to cross over into UK. They literally swim across the English Channel to reach United Kingdom, which in itself is a very risky journey. Many people die on the route, right? So this is a problem which affects India, and this has deep implication as well for India's ties with the friendly Western countries. It's not just UK which is dealing with this problem. There are many other countries, even Austria, for example, and even Greece, Italy. All these European countries, they have been receiving a huge influx of Indian illegal migrants. The United States is one of the most affected by Indian illegal migration. Believe it or not, last year, close to 1 lakh Indians were arrested by US immigration authorities as they were trying to enter the US illegally without a valid visa. So that has become the scale of illegal migration from India. And India has emerged as one of the biggest sources of illegal migrants to Western countries, particularly the US and West European countries. So all these countries are worried about the large flow of illegal migration, the refugee flow that they are receiving. And obviously, they will raise this issue with India. That's why many European countries are insisting on signing migration and mobility agreements with India. So that when migration and mobility agreements are signed, it helps the two countries to keep a check on the number of legal migrants passing into the other country, and they can easily filter out illegal migrants and deport them back to the country. There are many Indian movies as well which have explored this particular theme, from the latest movie Donkey to Shiddat, which actually depicts an illegal crossover from France to UK across the English Channel, right? And you also have a Malayalam movie by Dulquer Salman, the CIA, where he crosses over as an illegal migrant to the US, right? So many such movies have explored the same theme, and that highlights the extent of this problem. Now, some of you might ask, what is this fascination? Why do people risk their lives, risk their entire savings to leave India and go to some other country, right? So this is essentially the fantasy of chasing the American dream or the Western dream. It has become a social obligation, particularly in some states like Punjab, Gujarat, and even to an extent in Andhra Pradesh, to an extent in Kerala, right? It has become an obsession, a fantasy for many to go abroad, study, work, and reside in foreign countries. Those who can't make it legally, those who lack the qualification, or those who fail to meet the requirements for a legal visa, right? They get ready to take any risky route. People end up spending, believe it or not, more than 50 lakhs per person. That is the kind of money they have to pay the human traffickers and the middlemen to adopt this illegal route to reach other countries. And the risky route they take is a direct risk to their life, and they could get apprehended, right? This becomes quite embarrassing for India as well, that we are the source of large-scale illegal migration. We keep complaining about illegal migration from Bangladesh, right? But we ourselves are one big source of illegal migration to other developed countries. So these are people who are chasing a better life, a better status, right? Especially in Punjab, in Gujarat, especially in these two states, the trend has really caught up in the last 20 years. And there is a huge craze amongst the youth to leave behind their villages and reach these foreign countries because they would have seen their relatives, their other family members leading a slightly better life in other countries, right? But today, honestly, there are much better opportunities in India itself. But still the trend continues, and there are social compulsions as well, which drives them out of the country. So this is becoming a diplomatic issue for India. Western countries are putting a lot of pressure on India to keep a check on the extent of illegal migration, right? The charts presented here shows the significant rise in the entry of illegal migrants into UK across the English Channel, right? There is an exponential jump in the last few years especially. Even American authorities have presented data recently to show the exponential jump in the last 2 years. In the last 2-3 years itself, US has received more than 2 to 3 lakh Indian illegal migrants. That is the number we are talking about. More than 1 lakh were arrested just last year. Imagine how many might have entered as well, right, who are never discovered. So the numbers are very huge and very alarming, and it does have a huge impact on India's ties with these countries. The last big topic on page number 13, this is related to the political developments in Nepal. Whatever happens in our neighboring countries has a direct impact on India because we share borders with them, we have common interests, we have common concerns, and Nepal is a critical country for India. It's a Himalayan state that is sandwiched between India and China. It shares the border with China. So Nepal traditionally has had very good ties with India. India in general enjoys very good political, economic, and cultural influence in Nepal. But however, the political developments here, the political crisis that Nepal has seen repeatedly has been a cause of concern for India. At one point, Nepal was a monarchy. It was the only Hindu state, a theocratic state. Later, it witnessed a civil war in 1990s. Nepal went through a civil war led by the Communist Party of Nepal, the Maoist party. Just like India witnesses Naxalism by the Maoists, similarly, Nepal was also affected by Maoism, led by the Communist Party of Nepal. So this civil war lasted a good 10-15 years from 1990s to early 2000. And finally, after the civil war ended, it transitioned into a constitutional democracy. It transitioned into a secular constitutional democracy. And India played a very big role in this transition. In fact, India played the biggest role in ending the civil war. We supported the Nepali army, the Nepali government. We worked with the major political parties that were present. And we also worked with the Maoists to bring the civil war to an end in 2005. India mediated between all the parties in the civil war and provided for peace and stability. India started guiding Nepal towards becoming a secular constitutional democracy. But however, in Nepal, there are few anti-India elements, right, who have risen to power in the last 15 to 20 years. There are strong anti-India sentiments in Nepal. India is often accused of excessive interference in Nepal. India has often maintained very good relations with one major political party, which is the Nepali Congress. The Nepali Congress has always been very close to India, and any government formed by the Nepali Congress has been in favor of India. It's been seen as a pro-India party, which protects Indian interests. Even the Maoist party, which entered mainstream politics after the civil war ended, has been quite close to India, and its leader, Prachanda, Pushpa Kumar Dahal, or also called Prachanda, has been close to India. He is someone India can rely upon. All right. The current government which existed in Nepal was basically a coalition government between the Communist Party of Nepal, the Maoist faction headed by Prachanda. Prachanda was the prime minister as well, and the coalition partner was Nepali Congress. So this government was definitely seen as a pro-India government. But all of a sudden, changes have taken place again. What is the change? Differences have come up between the Maoist party, the Maoist Center Party, the party led by Prachanda, and the Nepali Congress over division of power, especially the chairperson's post in the parliament, right? Sharing this has become a divisive issue between Nepali Congress and the Maoist Centre Party, and both have split. So now Prachanda's party has formed a coalition with another communist faction, the Communist Party of Nepal, Unified Marxist Leninist, or also called the UML. Now this is a major concern for India, because this party is headed by KP Sharma Oli, who is known for his anti-India inclinations. KP Sharma Oli has already been the Prime Minister of Nepal for 2 terms, on 2 instances. So whenever he became the leader, whenever his party, the UML Communist Party, came to power, it has been clearly inclined towards China. In fact, KP Oli became a popular leader by building anti-India sentiments, by blaming all Nepal's problems on India, on India's interference in Nepal. He rose to power, he ensured that his party becomes prominent by playing on anti-India sentiments. So India looks at Communist Party of Nepal, the UML, and its leader KP Oli as anti-India political elements who are seen to favor China deliberately. When KP Oli was in power, he ensured that Nepal joins the Belt and Road Initiative sponsored by China, and also the border dispute, the minor border dispute that we have, right, with Nepal. This was deliberately blown out of proportion by KP Oli's government. We have a couple of regions along the India-Nepal border where we have a minor dispute which is a relic of the colonial era, which is left behind from the British days, right? So the Kala Pani dispute and the Susta dispute. These minor border disputes were unnecessarily escalated, blown out of proportion, and it had derailed India's ties with Nepal. China's strategic projects have been permitted in Nepal, which poses a threat to Indian interests. China today is extending its road and rail network into Nepal, which is seen as a threat by India, and most of these approvals were granted by the KP Oli government. So now, to India's displeasure, Nepali Congress has been left out from the coalition government due to differences between the Nepali Congress and the Communist Party, the Maoist party headed by Prachanda. So a new coalition has been formed between the 2 communist parties, and one of them is a concern for India. India has no issues with Prachanda or the Maoist Centre Party. Our major concern is about the UML party headed by KP Oli, which has been known for its pro-China inclinations and for its promotion of anti-India sentiments. So that is what worries India. So this development, which has occurred in the last couple of days, is a major development according to India, because this could change the balance of power again as far as India-China competition is concerned in the neighborhood. So this completes the detailed discussion of all the big articles. Now we head towards the last article under the prelim section, where I would like to talk about the jurisdiction of NIA. We have this article on page number 5 that says the Bengaluru bomb blast case has been handed over to NIA. You might have read in news recently there was a bomb blast, a minor bomb blast in Bengaluru at a very popular cafe, right? Few people have been injured, and the case was being initially investigated by the Karnataka State Police. The CCB, the Central, the Crime Bureau, the Crime Branch, right, which is under the State Police, the Karnataka State Police, had taken up the investigation. But now NIA has fully stepped in, and MHA has ordered the NIA to fully take over the case. So this development brings up the question, what exactly is the jurisdiction of NIA, right? So this is very important. NIA was established in 2009 as a direct result of the Mumbai attacks, the 26/11 Mumbai attacks. Within few days after the Mumbai attacks, which was one of India's biggest terrorist attack carried out by Lashkar-e-Toiba, India realized a critical gap in its counter-terrorism efforts. Until then, we did not have a dedicated counter-terror law enforcement agency. Most terror cases were handled by state police and the local city police. The CBI was always seen as an ineffective organization. CBI was dealing with multiple different specializations, and CBI was always compromised with regard to its efficiency, right? So basically, even though India was a big victim of terrorism, right, until 2008, 2009, we did not have a dedicated counter-terror law enforcement agency. So following the Mumbai attacks, the then Manmohan Singh government introduced a major reform in India's counter-terrorist efforts. The NIA Act was passed by the parliament. NIA Act was passed in 2008-2009 and the National Investigation Agency was established. So this law defines the jurisdiction of NIA. The NIA has exclusive nationwide jurisdiction over all terror cases. Any act of terrorism in the country, be it in Kashmir, be it in Punjab, in Northeast India, even in the Naxal corridor, or any other terror incident across India, NIA can claim exclusive jurisdiction of all terrorism cases. Why? Because NIA has been provided with that exclusive jurisdiction through the NIA Act. It primarily enforces the UAPA, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, which is the primary anti-terror law that we have in the country. So NIA's jurisdiction is nationwide. It can take over any terrorism case. State police will continue their own parallel investigation if they want to, but NIA can step in and fully take over the case after a terrorist attack. Is that clear? That is the power vested with this agency. The Act also provides for special courts. NIA special courts have been set up across India to fast track the prosecution of these terror cases so that quick justice can be delivered in cases of terrorism, right? So through the Act, NIA has exclusive jurisdiction of all terror cases and it does not require approval of state governments. NIA does not need any approvals from state governments to investigate terror cases. It already has automatic jurisdiction through the Act. You might know that CBI, on the other hand, has to request permission from states. If they haven't granted consent, CBI has to obtain permission from the states to carry out an investigation. But NIA need not ask for any approvals because it's established through a law, right? It's accountable, answerable to the parliament. So it does not wait for any approvals. It just needs an order from the Home Ministry to take over the cases and it immediately steps in and takes over the entire case. The concerned state police, they might continue their parallel investigation. They will have to cooperate with NIA and even share all the evidence, but NIA will maintain primary jurisdiction over the case. Next, one last point. Did you know that NIA has also been provided with foreign jurisdiction? It can investigate terror attacks in other countries as well. This was introduced through the 2019 amendment to the NIA Act. Because there could be terror attacks in other countries which concerns India. For example, in 2019, the Easter Sunday bombings in Sri Lanka, that major terror attack which happened in Sri Lanka had an Indian connection. The terrorists who executed the attack, which was an Islamic State branch in Sri Lanka, they had links in Tamil Nadu and Kerala. So Indian agencies were tracking them, monitoring this particular Sri Lankan terror group. So India was concerned and interested about further investigating this attack in Sri Lanka. We also had an attack in Afghanistan, in Kabul. The ISIS branch, Islamic State Khorasan or ISIS-K in Afghanistan, had carried out a major strike against a Sikh Gurudwara. Right? So as many Sikhs were killed in Kabul by Islamic State outfit, India was concerned about the attack and we wanted to be a part of the investigation. So through the 2019 amendment, NIA has been given foreign jurisdiction as well to investigate attacks happening in foreign countries where there is an Indian connection or where there is an impact on India. But of course, it will depend on permission given by the other country. We can approach other countries for permission, and if they grant approval, only then NIA can join the investigation. This is very similar to how FBI of the US also has foreign jurisdiction. For example, when the Mumbai attacks happened, right, Lashkar-e-Toiba targeted American and European tourists, specifically in Mumbai. So FBI was interested and the whole planning of the attack also had few American connections. So FBI was interested in investigating the 26/11 Mumbai attacks. It asked India for permission. India gave the approval, and FBI joined the investigation of 26/11. So similarly, NIA also has been given foreign jurisdiction through the 2019 amendment. So this is what you have to know from today's newspaper. Please take a look at the two practice questions. It's all based on what we have discussed. You can use them for your answer writing practice. So you don't have to read anything beyond this. There is one more editorial related to the WTO. I'm skipping that article because Sham sir is going to conduct a detailed analysis of the relevance of WTO. Just yesterday, we have already uploaded one video related to the latest 13th Ministerial Conference that was held in Dubai. We will be bringing out one more video on WTO to examine its relevance. So this topic, this editorial which is there, will be covered by Sham sir. Other than that, I've discussed all the other important articles in today's newspaper. So you don't have to go back and read it again. So I hope it was a good, fruitful session. Do let me know in the comments. Do press the like button, and I'll see you tomorrow. Till then, take care. Have a good day.